was mentioning that the various sessions we've had in the last two webinars have been recorded on YouTube, and you could, and those who are interested, especially journalists, journalism students, research scholars, and others, could log on to YouTube, type PII RIND, RIND, and gain access to these videos. There's a wealth of information out there, and I'm happy to start today's program welcoming none other than Vice Admiral MP Muralidharan. He, of course, spoke yesterday, and I wasn't able to catch his full presentation, but I did hear Sandeep Punithan mention, Admiral, that you played a very important role in Bombay 12 years ago with your support with Marine Commandos, with that swung the scales in India's favor. So we are proud of officers in uniform like you. We salute you. And it's a great pleasure for me and for all of us that you're here chairing the first session here this morning. I'm also, of course, happy to see that the other speakers are here. Vice Admiral Kannan, Mr. Anil Devli is here, and of course, Captain L.K. Panda. Briefly, I shall introduce Vice Admiral Muralidharan before he takes over. He's a former member of the Armed Forces Tribunal and a former Director General of the Indian Coast Guard, an alumnus of the Defense Academy, the National Defense Academy in Khadakwasla. He was commissioned into the Indian Navy on the 1st of January in 1975. A specialist in navigation and direction, he has commanded 3 warships, including the guided missile destroyer Ran Vijay, and has been fleet operations officer of the Western Fleet and principal director of naval operations at the integrated headquarters of the Ministry of Defense. He was also directing staff at the Defense Services Staff College in Wellington, naval assistant to the Chief of the Naval Staff, and naval attaché at the Embassy of India in Moscow. On elevation to flag rank as Rear Admiral, he was the Flag Officer Sea Training in Kochi, the Chief of Flag Staff Western Naval Command in Bombay, and also held the operational appointment of the Flag Officer Commanding in Maharashtra and the Gujarat Naval Area. On promotion to Vice Admiral, Muralidharan became the first commandant of the Indian Naval Academy at Arimala, which is a distinction, of course. Subsequently, he became the Chief of Personnel at Naval Headquarters prior to taking over as the 19th Director General of the Indian Coast Guard, from where he eventually retired in February of 2013. Post-retirement, he was appointed by the President of India as a member of the Armed Forces Tribunal at its regional bench in Kochi, an appointment that is equivalent to a sitting judge of a high court. The Admiral was awarded the Ati Vishisht Seva Medal twice by the President of India, and is also a recipient of the Now Sena Medal. For those of you who are interested in reading, I'm referring to journalists and researchers. You would do well to also look at what Vice Admiral Muralidharan has written and still writes for the Indian Defense Review. And some of the subjects that I see before me are quite interesting. He talks about the Indian Navy being an instrument of foreign policy, the maritime dimensions of India's foreign policy, and very intriguingly, he also writes about the relevance of the Arthashastra in the 21st century. So, a pleasure having you, Admiral. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shashi Nair. In fact, very kind of you. A lot of nice words you said about me. And now, having said, I must also apologize to the organizers for joining a bit late, a bit of network connectivity. So I will move on straight to the topic today. In fact, yesterday we have seen the whole lot of issues about China, India, and our maritime dimensions of the threat that we face and what we need to do to tackle it. Today we go on to another important facet of it, because maritime power is really nothing if you do not have ships, shipbuilding, and ports. Because whether you to carry your trade, which almost in our case, almost 90% by volume is in ships, or to defend our maritime interests, for both you need ships, both the mercantile marine as well as the warships that we need today. Now, shipbuilding and shipping is nothing new to India. Centuries ago, in fact, millenniums ago, in fact, the Rig Veda talks about people going out to sea and actually prays to the Lord Varuna, Lord of the Seas, to be kind unto our seafarers. the very fact that our people were transversing across the oceans and trading means they were building their own ships. Shipbuilding was very active. And we had all along the both on the west coast and the east coast very active shipping and shipbuilding activities. In fact, in the famous Trafalgar, Battle of Trafalgar, some of the ships were that was built in India. One of the oldest warships still around today, the Trincomalee, was actually built by the Wadias in Mumbai, in what is today the Mazgon Docks area. And nothing could have been put better than one of our most perceptive maritime historians and thinkers, K.M. Panikkar, in his book India and the Indian Ocean. And I quote, and he says, "We have also texts which laid down detailed instructions about construction of ocean-going vessels. The Yukti Kalpataru describes not only the construction of ships, but classifies them under different categories, such as those useful for inland navigation, for ocean voyage, for carrying goods, and carrying passengers. 10 different kinds of ocean-going vessels are enumerated, the biggest of which, known as the Vejini, is 176 cubits in length, 20 in breadth, and 17 and 3/8 in height." You can look at the details that they went into. Cabin ships of different kinds meant for passenger traffic are also described, as also those which are specially designed for naval warfare. A description by Niccolo Conti in the earlier part of the 15th century shows that these instructions were not merely academic. And he says that natives of India built some ships larger than ours, capable of containing 2,000 butts, and with 5 sails and as many masts. The lower part is constructed with triple planks in order to withstand the force of tempest to which they are much exposed. In fact, it goes on to say that Manu, the great lawgiver, provides in his code for shipping and port dues, while Kautilya's Arthashastra, an authoritative work on administration which was written in the 4th century BC, lays down the functions of port commissioner and harbor master. The board of shipping was one of the great departments of the Mauryan emperors, unquote. In fact, so you will see that we had a very rich tradition, somehow with colonization, and when the British came in, they virtually killed the Indian shipping and shipbuilding industry. Of course, we were also passing it on from generation to generation in means of poems. In Gujarat, you will find a lot of poetry that's been written which describes how a ship is to be constructed. But now, in this era, to look at what exactly we need to do, we have the eminent panelists, and the first of the speakers is nobody other than Vice Admiral Kannan, a very old colleague and a close friend of mine for many, many years now. He holds a bachelor's degree in electronics and communications. He started from the Trivandrum College of Engineering. Then he took an MTech from IIT Powai and is a postgraduate in management from the Jamanlal Bajaj Institute at Mumbai. He has nearly 4 decades in the Navy with varied experience, of which nearly 2 decades where he was associated with various disciplines of indigenous development of naval equipment, integration of equipment on warships, and more importantly, submarine construction. For nearly 4 years, he was the program director of the strategic program of the Indian Navy, during which our nuclear submarine, the INS Arihant, was launched. His final appointment in the Navy was the Chief of Material. He's got 3 presidential awards, the VSM, the Ativish Seva Medal, and the Param Vishish Seva Medal. Soon after retirement, he took over as the Managing Director and the CEO of the L&T Shipbuilding with effect from mid-2015. He's going to speak to us on the PPP model of shipbuilding for promoting comprehensive maritime potential of India. Over to Admiral Kannan.
I will just upload my presentation. Meanwhile, give me just a minute. I think there's some, okay. I think this is checked out.
As Aishwarya got a backup, she can help you from.
Aishwarya?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm having difficulty in, I'll open it and close it once more.
Okay,
Okay.
sir.
Okay, right.
So present now, and then you click a window.
Yeah, I'll just close my presentation and open it again.
Yes, sir.
Okay, got it. Go back. Cancel. Present now. A window. Right, I got it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Share. Right.
Yes.
Okay, now, are you able to see the screen?
Yes, sir. It's coming on, sir. Thank you, sir.
Right. Okay. First of all, I want to thank the Institute of Contemporary Studies, Bangalore, Chennai Center for China Studies, and the Press Institute of India for having given me this opportunity to speak on a revival of shipbuilding through PPP, a topic very close to my heart. I'd also like to thank the chair, Vice Admiral Muralidharan, who had been my naval colleague for over 4 decades. We used to very fondly call him Murali. So Murali, thank you very much for the very generous introduction. I will straight away go on to the topic. Murali has already said that India has been a leading shipbuilding country, and which continued till almost till the middle of the 19th century, whereafter there was a downward trend for technological and industrial reasons. But in my presentation, I will be focusing only on the post-independence part of it, and that also what happened the last 50 years. And more so, a little more focus on the last 20 years, where policies are being changed by the government. And I would like to script what can be done now onwards to boost this maritime capability so that our overall maritime capability is enhanced. I have a very short presentation of about 10 slides. And I'll start with the first slide. Scope of shipbuilding in India, I can put it into 2 buckets. One is the commercial ships and others the defense vessels. And the number of shipyards we have today, public sector are 7 in number, 5 are under MOD or MOS. MOS stands for Ministry of Shipping. Cochin Shipyard is under MOS, rest all under MOD. 2 are with states, Gujarat, West Bengal. And private sector, there are about 10 shipyards at the moment. There were more earlier, I'll come to it a little later. But at the moment, there are about 10 shipyards which are functional. You will agree with me, ships are built on land and then put into water. So there's land-water interface which has to be available as a part of infrastructure, be it in the form of dry dock, ship lift, jetties, shipyards, etc. They're all very expensive, capital-intensive infrastructure, which the government has invested in a big way, and some private entities also have invested in the last couple of decades. Now, how has the shipbuilding progressed in the commercial ships? We'll take first. As far as commercial ships are concerned, in the last 20 years, India's contribution has been just about 1% of global production, average, I mean. There has been a peak, of course, in 2007 to 2012, which touched 3.5%. But there are other reasons for this peak. There was a very big demand in the oil sector. There was also a subsidy program which is being run by the government at that point of time, almost concurrently. So shipbuilding had picked up, and more importantly, few private sector shipyards had come into operation. So you had capacity enhancement at the time. There was a demand which was higher, and there was a subsidy going on. All 3 factors enabled us to achieve the peak. But when this happened, most of our PSUs were engaged in defense projects, which even today, they are mostly engaged in defense projects. And 2 of them, Cochin Shipyard and the Hindustan Shipyard, have infrastructure to build commercial ship of 1 lakh ton TWT or a little more in case of Cochin. But despite that capability, they have been largely focusing on defense production. Today, Ministry of Shipping has got an ongoing subsidy scheme, which is around 16% now. Earlier it was 20%. Year after year, it slowly comes down. Primary aim being to encourage shipbuilding. But despite this ship subsidy scheme, the government continues to nominate CSL for many of its requirements, be it in Laccadives, be it in Andaman Nicobar, or whether Shipping Corporation of India wants some additional vessels. So that has been going on. Why I'm saying this is, it has not been a level playing field between the private and the public from the Ministry of Shipping side. They have only one shipyard under them, that is Cochin. So they have been giving some contracts to them unilaterally. That doesn't matter, but the fact is there's a subsidy scheme which is available for everyone. But the subsidy scheme has not produced the results which they are looking for. Reason is threefold. The quantum which they are gaining, it looks fairly impressive. It was around 20%, now it's around 16%. But the import content of materials and machinery for shipbuilding is very high as far as India is concerned. So you have to import, you import at a higher cost. So it actually puts you in a disadvantage with competitors from global side. Design talented is limited in India. So you have to buy a design from abroad, which is going to be more expensive. You may have to test the design if it's a first time design, which means again testing is abroad, you'll spend more money. And lastly, there is huge competition from, it was Korea, China, now it has become China, Korea, Vietnam in that order. So you find that the Indian shipyards today, even though they have a subsidy scheme, they are not able to attract sufficient orders. I told you some time back, the public sector shipyards except CSL is not interested in commercial shipbuilding. So who is left is only CSL and private sector shipyards. And all the private sector shipyards which are functional today have infrastructure limitation. They can't build big ships. They can only build small ships. So you find the sector in which you're competing globally is got far too much of competitors, plus all the disadvantages you have by way of import, design, and competition. You find shipbuilding is getting stalled in India. Commercial shipbuilding today is stalled in India, and I don't see a great future for commercial shipbuilding unless some fundamental changes are introduced by the government. We'll touch upon it towards the end of the presentation. So as it stands, it is CSL plus few private sector shipyards which can build very, very small vessels. And that's not good. We don't even touch 1% of global production of commercial ships. What the government can do, I think they should extend the incentives to owners and not to the shipbuilders. It can be in lieu of the subsidy, because today owners want to go and buy from abroad. I read in the paper today that the Ministry of Shipping is coming up with a bill that you can have an Indian flagship as long as there is 51% of ownership by the cost of the vessel or by the price of the vessel. Earlier it was 100%. So you have an incentive for the owner to have a joint ownership along with a foreign party. So if you can give incentive to the Indian owners, you will find that more orders may be placed on Indian shipyards. Second, the FRR option should be given to Indian shipyard. That means first right of refusal. In short, government should encourage domestic production, and Indian shipyards have to say they cannot build it before they can buy from abroad. I think that will do some good. The few years from now, you will find Indian shipbuilding will pick up. At the moment, they desperately want some measures like this. Second aspect, and it's going to be time consuming to realize this, domestic manufacturing potential of marine machinery, marine equipment, mostly electronic equipment, has to be enhanced. Imports have to get reduced. Otherwise, you will find that Indian shipbuilders will continue to be at a disadvantage, financial disadvantage, as far as price is concerned. And in fact, the government's call of Atmanirbhar is almost the same. Try and produce as much of Indian machinery, Indian equipment into our ships. Third point, and which is more relevant now, the government requires 1,000 vessels, small vessels, up to 2,000 DWT for their Sagarmala program. In fact, the Sagarmala program should have kicked off by 2018. It has not happened. Today we are in 2020. It has still not happened enough. It may pick up in another year or so, but they do require about 1,000 ships for the next 10 years. So this is well within the capacity of the Indian shipyard. It is also well within the capacity of the infrastructure of Indian shipyards. And they can be put to use for inland water transportation. So the government needs to look at this opportunity to make sure the first 2 points which I said, incentive to owners as well as enhancing domestic manufacturing potential, if these two can be introduced along with this Sagarmala program, you will find the shipbuilding will pick up, and thereafter it will climb to a higher share of global production. The last point, which can be discussed, which can be debated, there is a study which has been done in China that they feel shipyards do better if they do both commercial and defense ships. The managerial talent, the managerial philosophy and style required in commercial ships is different from defense ships. Defense ships are a little more commitment is there from the owner. He is prepared to wait for some more time. He is little acceptable to some change in specification, which doesn't happen in commercial ships. I think shipyards do a far better job when they execute a commercial ship, because their entire contract depends on how well they achieve in time as well as in quality. So Chinese experiment shows that it is better to have shipyards, not all shipyards, selected shipyards, do both commercial and defense, so that the work culture as well as the managerial style is improved and the shipyards become more efficient. We can debate on this if there's a requirement after the presentation. Now I shift over to defense ships. Defense shipbuilding till 2000. It started sometime in mid-60s. It has been only in public sector till 2000. The design has been by Navy. Not surprising, there has been a lack of coordination, and this has been a matter of concern not only for the Navy but also for the shipyard, but it remains fairly unresolved even to date. There's a lot of issues on when you have two agencies, one designing and one constructing, and you find they are not able to converge on all the issues in good time. In 30 years, the last 30 years, many classes of ship were built for Navy and Coast Guard, with almost every class having suffered time and cost overrun. It has shown us that we have suffered on this front. So sometime in mid-90s, MOD initiated induction of private sector shipyards. They said you can come into this fray and perhaps there'll be some change in shipbuilding efficiency. So sometime in mid-90s, government cleared private sector shipyards can come. Many shipyards came into production after that. I'll touch upon it in the next slide. So if I take stock of 2000, by the year 2000, Navy and Coast Guard had 96 indigenously built ships, almost all by PSUs except 10 in number interceptor boats given by Anderson Marine Goa to the Coast Guard. Rest all have been by public sector. Of course, these 10 in number boats had a huge amount of import content. That apart, they are very small ships. So if you look at the overall production, it was mostly public sector participation and very little from private, except for Anderson Marine. That is till the year 2000. Let us see what happened in the last 20 years, from 2000 to 2020. New private sector shipyards came. I've listed a few of them, few important of them. ABG, Bharati, L&T, Pipavav, which became Reliance later, and Shaft. They all entered fray, and all of them got their first defense order by 2011. Because when Defense Ministry cleared induction of private sector shipyards by 1999, these shipyards started establishing themselves. Some had improved upon already existing infrastructure. Some other shipyards were created de novo, and you found that they had competed and they have been able to get some defense order by 2011. In the year 2000 to 2020, Navy had added 59 indigenously built ships and Coast Guard 163 vessels. So you see a huge difference between the number of ships of Navy and the vessels of Coast Guard. There's a reason for it. Coast Guard vessels were very small vessels, while the Navy's ships were very big vessels. The Navy's 59 ships comprised 55 from PSUs and 4 from private, very small representation by private, which included the FDN-2, which is presently in Port Blair, 2 sail ships, Tarini and I think there's a mistake here, it's not made, it is Madhe, and TRV Astradharani. These are the 4 ships which were built in private sector. And obviously, only the auxiliary vessels were built in private yards in the 20 years from 2000 onwards. Rest all 55 warships for the Navy were built in PSUs. There could be a reason for it. We'll look at it a little later. But there's a distinct grouping which has emerged if you look at the last 20 years. If you look at Coast Guard got 101 from private yards and 62 from PSUs. And all of them were small ships. There were interceptor craft, there were air cushion vessels, there were vessels required for fast patrol operations. But there was a significant 60 of them from PSUs out of the 160. So there was a participation from public sector as well, more from the private sector. And the biggest ship which was ever produced for the Coast Guard was the pollution control vessel, which has come from the ABG shipyard. So the trend of public-private participation in shipbuilding, as far as defense is concerned, it was nil before 2000. It improved upon, but largely grouped as auxiliary vessels in private yards and mostly for the Coast Guard, while the big warships continue to be in PSUs, which is, as of today, even it is relevant. Right. Now let us see some more aspects, what happened on this front. The government was very seriously worried about private sector shipyards who had invested so much of money to create the infrastructure. They were getting very small orders from Coast Guard, very small ships, and obviously this revenue was very less, limited, and this had left many of the ships to become bankrupt. The income was far less than the break-even point for the infrastructure which they created. ABG went bankrupt, Bharati, Reliance, now all have become bankrupt, partially due to lack of orders and partially due to non-level playing field in the PPP model which the government is following. Lack of orders, I also meant lack of orders from abroad for commercial ships, because they're free to take both commercial and defense. But they got very little order from abroad also because there was a slump in global shipbuilding. So it combined with that lack of orders from abroad as well as non-level playing field for domestic orders. MOD was very serious with this downturn. So they brought in new policies in 2019. I think these policies have been very well introduced. They have brought in a huge change in the level playing field. Now it is based largely on technical and financial strength of the companies. But the unfortunate thing is there is no private sector shipyard now left. All have withered away except L&T and Shaft. Shaft is a shipyard in the west coast somewhere in Gujarat, and L&T is in Chennai. Except for these two and some few minor yards, rest all have fallen by the wayside. But the government brought in the PPP in 2020. Some came by end of 19, I would say 2020. But it promises to strengthen the PPP. But I think it's a bit too late. It's happened. I don't know what will happen to the shipyards which have already become bankrupt, how they will get revived. Let us see how this can happen. So if you look at today's orders, I have already told you what happened in 2020, 59 ships. If you look at today's orders, there are 50 ships under construction. 40 are for the Navy, 10 for Coast Guard. And out of the 40 for the Navy, all 40 are in PSU, none in private. So all ships of Navy today, till they get built and commissioned, let's say 2025, or it could be 2028, it's going to be PSU, 0 in private. Coast Guard has got 10 ships, out of which 7 are in public sector and 3 in private sector. It so happens all 3 which are remaining are in L&T, which will finish in another 1 year's time because they had been delivering ships on time. So you will find by 2021, there are no ships which are under construction in private sector as far as defense is concerned. I'm not
Admiral Kannan,
sorry.
if my may interrupt, Admiral Kannan, 2 minutes for to wind up. You're reaching a time.
2 minutes. Okay, so I will. So the pipeline shows. Let's come to conclusions. The subsidy scheme of shipping ministry has not been a success, as I told you earlier. There needs to be an alternative scheme. Government needs to reactivate commercial shipbuilding through improved indigenous production of machinery and equipment. I already talked about it. In case of defense vessels, MOD took 15 years to evolve a balanced PPP scheme, but by the time most of the ships have fallen by the wayside. Maybe you can look at some of the public sectors doing both commercial and defense orders so that the efficiency of shipbuilding improves. So way ahead, short term for next 10 years, enhance indigenous content in commercial defense ships, which I mentioned earlier. Sagarmala, government should take a decision, don't import ships. Build it only in India. Even if our shipyards want more time, and even if they are marginally more expensive. But I think they have to take this hard decision. They have to also identify infrastructure augmentation required to some PSUs in case they want to do construction of both and repair of commercial ships. Another point which I'd like government to examine is Navy has got a huge talent in design, and I think this design talent is not being fully exploited. They can extend this design talent to friendly countries for designing their warships. It will also bring in some contracts for shipbuilding automatically. There's already a MOD design house called Nirdesh. It is not very active. Perhaps through that it can be channelized. Long term, beyond 2030, the government should have an objective of transforming India into a lively hub for ship repairs. Today, very little ship repairs are taking place within India. We should look at it. Rest of it all are going to Singapore and Sri Lanka. They should look at how they will be able to transform into a hub for ship repairs. This requires some understanding with the shipyards and improving their facilities if required. And lastly, capture the export market for design and construction of defense ships as well as commercial ships, especially for those countries which are in the Indian Ocean region. We are well located. We have enough shipyards to do this. We have the design talent to do it, but we have to make sure that we are able to capture this potential. With this, we'll be able to improve our maritime potential and go up by a couple of notches on the supremacy in this area, and also have the support of many other IOR countries and nations who will be able to look upon to India for support of their shipbuilding program and ship design program. Also for ship repairs in case they are operating ships in this region. With this, I come to the end of my presentation. Jai Hind and thank you.
Thank you, Admiral Kannan. I think you have very exhaustively covered the state of shipbuilding today in our country and how we could revive it, and specifically have brought out the salient aspects of how with a PPP model and by encouraging the public sector, private sector, in addition to the existing public sector, we could build up a robust shipbuilding industry. We'll see more about this in the question answer session. I'll move on to the next speaker, next panelist. He's going to speak to us on the Indian maritime context, an unending narrative for sea-blind policymakers pre-COVID and post-COVID. To speak to us on this, we have with us Mr. Anil Devli, who is the CEO of the Indian National Ship Owners Association. He's a lawyer by training, an active member of the Indian Maritime Fraternity. He's been involved in Indian shipping for over 2 decades now, and is currently the CEO of the INSA, or the Indian Naval Ship Owners Association, which is involved in furthering the interest of the Indian flag. He has varied experience in the business of ship owning, ship operations, and his experience also in pursuing policies for growth of the Indian shipping industry. He engages and contributes towards other maritime related activities. He's a firm believer that the growth of India as a worldwide maritime power is of paramount importance, and India's relevance and standing in the world is invariably linked to the growth of the Indian flag shipping industry. Over to Mr. Anil Devli.
Good morning to you. Good morning to everybody. Namaskar. Without wasting too much time, I will go on to my side of the presentation. First of all, thank you for this opportunity. I was originally asked to talk about the impact of COVID, but then when I saw the speakers and I saw the kind of audience that was expected, I think I decided that I would be doing my industry a disfavor if I was to only talk about COVID, because COVID is not strategy. But since I was asked, so I will quickly touch upon what COVID has done and what has been the impact of COVID while I put up my presentation to all of you. One important aspect about COVID for the information of all of you is that we were perhaps the only industry in India that continued to work during COVID times. We were the one single industry that continued to work during COVID times. And why did this happen? This happened because we had an extremely active Director General of Shipping. I'm proud to tell you that amongst all the countries worldwide, we were amongst the first in almost every policy that relates to sign-on, sign-off of crew. I'm not saying that we did the best job, but I can tell all of you here present that between the DG Shipping, the Ministry of Shipping, the Ministry of Home, and the industry consultation, I think we did a wonderful job. Of course, still a lot of our Indian seafarers got stuck on ships, were not able to sign off, contracts got extended. But let me tell you this on behalf of the government and on behalf of the industry, that this was not for want of trying on behalf of the maritime authorities. The problems that we faced were from people who were non-maritime. We faced problems from PHOs, we faced problems from agents, we faced problems from road operators, hotels, and various other people where rent seeking became the major issue. And I will shut this issue by just leaving one thought with you. The cost of exchanging a seafarer has now gone up by 300%. So what used to cost us 1 rupee is now costing us 300 rupees in respect of change of a seafarer. Having said that, I will come to utilizing this opportunity to talk about the perspective of India and China in respect of the one problem, which has been the blindness on the part of the policymakers in the context of growth of Indian shipping. And I trust all of you can see my presentation. So I'm moving forward with that belief. As you can see in the table, we have at the beginning of 1990, the Chinese controlled fleet in deadweight was just about twice that of the Indian ships. And thereafter, in 1990, while the fleet was 2.3 times, in 2000, it became 3.2 times Indian fleet. By 2010, they were 9 times our fleet. And in 2020, the Chinese fleet is 17 times that of the Indian fleet. In terms of world ranking, in 1990, China was 8, we were 13. In 2000, they grew to be number 5 in the world. We went down to 17. In 2010, they went up to be 3rd in the world. We went down to 17. And in 2020, they continue to be 3rd in the world, and we have gone down to 18. So this is the situation of Indian fleet versus China fleet. Between 1990 and 2000, again, just for mathematics and for impact, the Chinese fleet grew by 57%, whereas we grew by just 12%. Between 2000 and 2010, ladies and gentlemen, Chinese fleet grew by 252%. 252%, while we grew by just 29%. And thereafter, the Chinese have kind of sped away. Their growth is at 137% by 2020, with a fleet of 329 million deadweight. And we grew in that period by 4 million deadweight, just 4 million deadweight. It is our belief that the national maritime power of a country is the amalgamation of a series of national interests, affirming coordinated action by the Indian industry, by the Indian government. I think somebody's mic is on. If mic can be put off.
Sripati, yeah, that's it's switched off.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Indian government, Indian defense establishment, and the Indian citizenry. So it has to be an amalgamation of all of that. And only a coordinated and an aware action would realize the national interest and protect our national interest. So what has actually been done? So let us take step by step. The Indian industry. In 2017, Indian oil companies made their first purchase of crude oil from USA. We decided to buy 1.6 million barrels, which was to be transported on a VLCC. And the cost of the cargo was supposed to be very, very competitive. Who carried this cargo? A company called PetroChina. PetroChina was given the contract to move this cargo from the US into India. What was all the more worrying is that this was exactly the same time when the Doklam face-off was on between India and China. What is also worrying is that the oil companies did not even bother to offer this cargo to Indian shipping companies, though Indian crude carriers carry crude for various international companies such as Shell, BP, Chevron, and for all the top oil companies, Indian companies serve them. This is the attitude and the method with which Indian industry works. We find that the Indian industry, the consumers, are reluctant to use Indian fleet. There are reasons for this which cannot be spoken about, we are all aware of what are the reasons, and this continues to be a problem. Very recently, the DPIIT has come out with a circular which says that all contracts up to 200 crores must be done with local companies. And yet Indian oil companies continue to float global tenders and award contracts to foreign shipping companies. I must add here quickly, the reason they are able to award these contracts to foreign shipping companies is because if you operate a ship owning company in India, you pay 22% more So your cost of operation, if the cost of operation of a foreign shipping company is 100 rupees, then the cost of an operation of an Indian shipping company is 122 rupees 56 paisa. We are 22.56% more costly, and we are only costly because of taxes. Because when we operate outside India and don't bring our ships into India, we are able to carry all kinds of cargoes. We go on to the next one, the Indian citizenry. And in this context, I must talk about the fancy for foreign in place of vocal for local. It is fashionable within India to try and say that what is done by the non-Indian is the best solution. This attitude then comes back to bite us, but by the time it comes back to bite us, we find that we are completely impotent to be able to do anything. I refer now to the issue that we are facing in respect of containerized cargo. I'm sure all of you have read that Indian cargo for exports is not able to find enough containers solely because all containers continue to find movement ex-China, Vietnam, all the way into Europe and into the US. And no containers are being repositioned into India. And why is it that India faces this, and a country that exports, of course, much larger than us, such as China, why is it that China did not face this, and why is India facing it? For the one simple reason that China realized the need for having its own container shipping company. COSCO, which is one of the leading shipping companies, and it is understood that it is perhaps the second largest container shipping company in the world today, soon after Maersk, is a Chinese company. What do we have in India? Zero. In fact, we had 4 Indian fledgling shipping companies which were operating container vessels. And at that time, a smart person within the government decided to say that the same cargo that an Indian shipping company can carry should be carried by a foreigner so that he doesn't have to pay tax. And all that cargo was moved out from an Indian company to the foreign shipping company. Since the time this policy has come, we have not had one single container vessel bought in India. We have bought our crude oil carriers, we have purchased gas carriers, we have purchased bulk carriers, dredgers, offshore fleet, but we haven't purchased container carriers. On a similar note, China prescribes that at least 85% of its crude oil and all other strategic cargo must move on Chinese controlled tonnage, which means tonnage owned in China or in Hong Kong. And that is why there has been this huge growth of Chinese fleet, whereas we continue to ensure that our policies work to the disadvantage of Indian shipping companies. China follows a policy of FOB on imports, whereby it ensures that it controls the transportation of cargo. Indian companies like to work on CIF, again for reasons well known but unspeakable. The Indian government, thankfully now we have a wonderful minister who is taking personal interest in the growth of not only in the Indian shipping industry, but shipbuilding, ship repair, and shipping. All 3 of which goes together. One of the important changes that has been made in the past 2 weeks has been that all ships which are built in India would now get the right of first refusal over government cargo. And therefore, if you had a ship which was built in India, such a vessel would get right over any vessel that was in the Indian flag. The DG Shipping has also been an excellent source of support. Of course, there are still bureaucrats who, in the morning, the person who, the convener spoke about the colonization of thought, and this colonization of thought continues to prevail. We still have bureaucrats who feel that it is all right to have a taxi and not have an owned car. Coming to the Indian defense establishment, the Indian Navy and the Coast Guard has always been very supportive of the Indian merchant fleet. I would be lacking in my duty if I were not to make a special mention of the National Maritime Foundation, Chavan Saab, and his team and the DG there for having supported Indian shipping. We now find that the Maritime Development Council is also actively engaged in and have understood the importance and growth of Indian merchant marine. However, whatever we do, we seem to be hesitant in what we want to do. We have no clarity on what we require to do, and we continue to get damaged in respect of our business. Recently, China has said that vessels having Indian crew on board signed on immediately before coming to China will not be allowed to berth in Chinese ports. You are all aware that a Great Eastern vessel with Australian cargo has been waiting outside since July outside a Chinese port, and neither is the crew allowed to get on, or the vessel is all stuck. So therefore, we seem to be hesitant on what we require, whereas the world is not hesitant about what needs to be done. It is therefore a heartbreaking conclusion that we have never been able to create a robust fleet as an effective counter to any threat, solely because we have lacked the ability to understand the importance of a merchant marine. We have failed in understanding the importance of ensuring a national fleet, and we have been proud of supporting foreign-built ships, as Admiral Kannan said some time ago, foreign-built ships, foreign-flagged ships. Everything that is foreign seems to be the flavor of the day. And thank God for this government now, and thank God for vocal for local. But it's going to require a lot more than a slogan to ensure that the mindset is changed and people start looking as Indian assets, Indian ship repair yards, Indian shipbuilding yards, and Indian shipping as a necessary and important arm of the growth of the economic strength of India. And I would humbly request all of you to put in your voice and your word wherever you can for the growth of these three entities. And I speak on behalf of Indian shipbuilding, on behalf of Indian ship repair, and most importantly, on behalf of Indian ship owning. What is the use of having 10,000 ships or 1,000 ships, even small, if there is going to be no shipping industry at all? Whom are we going to build for? It's exceedingly important to stop deflecting responsibility. And there is a need to support the national industry. As I said some time ago, we were extremely gladdened to see that various think tanks are now supporting the need for a national shipping industry. We are very happy that we were invited by your organization to come and speak here, which we take it as an awareness of the need to understand the importance of a merchant fleet. I'm also happy to say that your own colleagues who are in the Indian Navy now currently have been in close touch with the Indian shipping and are working closely with us as well as the Ministry of Shipping to ensure that there is growth of the merchant marine. Without the merchant marine, we are all going to be stuck. And I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have on the subject. Once again, grateful to the organization for having provided me this opportunity. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Mr. Devli. I think that is very well put across the importance of actual indigenization or the need for an Indian shipping industry and how we can support our own efforts. I mean, it takes me back to the old days of what Mahatma Gandhi said of weaving our own cloth. I think something similar. People would have been very happy to get imported textiles from there. But what the father of the nation said about textiles and clothing, I think it is equally important today in the shipping industry. We'll look at more of this during the question answer session. And I'll now move on to the third panelist and the final part of this session, which is talking about the security challenges in India's shipping industry. And to talk to us about this, we have none other than Captain L.K. Panda, the former nautical advisor to Government of India. He actually superannuated in 2016 as a nautical advisor to Government of India. He's a lead consultant with many maritime consultancy firms. He has served as a competent person and consultant in Caspian states on behalf of the IMO. He continues the association with them. He completed his pre-sea course training on the old training ship Rajendra in 1976. He joined the DG of Shipping in 1992. He served as the Principal Officer, Registrar of Ships at Kolkata, Kochi, and Mumbai. He has led national delegation to IMO, ILO, and was a member of the Maritime Security Group in formulation of the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code, which is known as the ISPS code in short, which brought a different paradigm of thinking into the thought process of the maritime security. Over to Captain Panda.
Just allow me 1 minute to make my presentation.
Captain, do you require any help from my end?
No, I'm making it.
All right. Thank you.
Austin, can they see the screen? Austin, can they see the screen? Can you see it now?
Is it coming up?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Can you see
it's
my-
on. Yeah, we
Yeah,
can see it now.
okay,
We can
okay.
see it now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you and good morning to all. I thank the organizers to have given me this opportunity to express my views on these issues. And I thank the chair for the generous introduction. Now, going ahead with the thought process that was expressed by my good friend Anil Devli, the CEO of INSA. And having seen the security aspects in the Director General of Shipping, I thought that I take a different view to the security concerns that are being faced by Indian shipping industry, more in the thought process of how the world is changing, how there has been a paradigm shift in security from the age-old security provided by the defense entities to the issues that are very relevant and are being caused because of the trade. Indian shipping industry is no different than the world shipping industry that is undergoing tremendous changes. And in that, if we see the world trade, we see that well over 90% of the cargo is moving by ships. And though it is said most regulated, but I dare say that it is most regulated as far as safety aspect is concerned. But we will observe that there are lacunas, there are issues, and very important issues which are to be dealt by the world community. We have well over 96,000 ships and well over 2 million seafarers, of which, as I understand, that we have over 2.5 lakh Indian seafarers working on various types of ships. Each issue has its own problem. We'll discuss as we go along. But one thing for sure, that the shipping plays such an integral part that had there been no shipping, half the world would have died of hunger and half would have died of cold. Therefore, security of shipping in every respect, right from cargo, from its safety, from the security element, and the human element, will have to be protected for our own survival. And India is no exception to it. I've just taken the data from the UN publications on maritime transport, which gives that how the world trade, or rather the world maritime trade, is going to evolve. This is the data of 2019. The maritime trade development is very synonymous with the world trade development. The UNCTAD says that the trade is going to move at about 3.5% to 4% this year. And as you can see, the maritime trade has also moved by 2.7%. And the beauty is that in the last few years, 60% of the maritime trade is controlled by Asia. And when I say Asia, it's well over 50% by China alone. Despite the fact that there have been trade tensions, despite the fact that China has embarked on a different mode of transport through its Belt and Road Initiative, but still the Asian trade, and in fact the world trade, I dare say that the 40% of the maritime trade is being controlled by China due to its asymmetry. Now, if we see the shipbuilding, again, from the traditional shipbuilding, starting from the Norwegians, from the Europeans, shifting to the Japanese, then to the Koreans, then now going to China. As rightly said by Vice Admiral Kannan, that China is at present the biggest shipbuilding country in the world, controlling almost 40% of the tonnage, followed by Korea, and then followed by the Japanese. You may be knowing, just about 10 days back, China launched the biggest valet or the ore carrier in the world, well over 400,000 tons. And we see that beside the ships, almost 95% of the containers are also manufactured in China. Now, coming to having seen how the trade has developed, or where the trade is moving. Now, what are the challenges to shipping? And if we can secure those challenges, the shipping in general will be well protected. The challenges that are coming to shipping are commercial and trade related. These have no common platform as such. Various platforms have made different standard processes, and BIMCO being one. But I dare say that there is yet a standard platform on commercial documents as such. There is lack of legal clarity, though we have UNCLOS, which has been accepted by many countries, but the United States is yet to accept the same. Territorial disputes continues in the sense that every country, though, should accept the general principle of the coastal limit, but we have seen very recently the root cause of problem in the South China Sea and the reason there. There has been over exploitation because the EEZ announced by the different countries, some may not be meeting the norms of the UNCLOS. Now the challenges are also divided into non-state actors. Non-state actors mean the incidences happening off the Horn of Africa, on the west coast of Africa, and the activities due to what happened off Mediterranean in Aquila Laro, off Limburg, and other ships which are being attacked by the terrorists. There has been inadequate operation, which I have experienced myself while working at Directorate General of Shipping as a nautical advisor. It's very difficult to pursue a case and take it to its logical end when there is an incident on board the merchant ships leading to casualties. Now, going to the detail of these, again, the spectrum of challenges are the legislation, not only internationally, but in our own country as well. We have a Merchant Shipping Act, which I am afraid is not meeting the requirement of the present day. It was a consolidated act from 1958 and requires changes. This change process has been going on for the last 4 years and is yet to see the light of the day, or the new act we are yet to have, which is conducive to the present environment. There has been monitoring and control through the flag state and the port states so that ships can safely operate. I have the pleasure in saying that during my service in Directorate General of Shipping, we were the first country to enact the port entry rules. We were one of the first countries to enact the port entry rules in 2012, whereby we ensured that the ships which are operating in our coastal waters or trying to enter our ports are safe, secure, and have an element of accountability, which I'll discuss a little later. Because in the recent past, many new registries have come up, and it is very unfortunate that the pride of ship owning by a country, by an owner, has given way to third-party ship managements. Today, it's impossible to trace the owner of a ship. The open registries, which were known as flag conveniences before, allow such freedom by which you need not register the owner's name as such. We saw the great difficulty in the case of Prestige and many other ships, which created pollution problems and had enormous difficulty in tracing the owner and the actual culprit. The managers, Mr. Van der Peer of Holland, about 35 years back, started the third-party management. Today, a ship is being owned by someone, registered by someone, managed by 3 entities. One entity manages the manning, that means they look after the crew, their employment, their service condition, etc. Another manager is for the operation, the cargo operation, and another manager we have for technical management. And then the same ship is registered by a classification society, which may not be well known. Though the IMO made sincere efforts to have classification societies meet certain requirements through the RO code, but as I understand, as on today, there are well over 50 classification societies. It's different that nearly 90% of the ships are registered by the International Association of Classification Societies, commonly known as IACS. But it is the 10% which create the maximum problems. Now, going down to the next one, the responsibility of the trade entities. Shipping trade, I say with lot of reservation, has not been all that clean as such. We have observed the cargo being declared in a different, by a different name. Who can forget the incident of one ship catching fire off Bombay Harbor? I was the inquiry officer there. It was a misdeclared cargo, shipped by a country, transshipped by another country, and it was nearly impossible to trace the culprit or the irresponsible entity. Many container ships have sunk due to overloading. I had the pleasure of introducing the verified gross mass initiative in India, by which every container being loaded on the ship has to be weighed and certified before it enters the port. But the VGM initiative, or commonly called as verified gross mass initiative, is not being adhered to. We're not very sure of the cargo inside, the quantity inside, and in fact, the certification of the container as such. There have been many instances of various type of cargoes, legal and illegal, coming to Bombay port, contrary to the manifesto, contrary to the expectation of the receiver.
Sorry to interrupt, Captain.
There has
5
been-
minutes. 5 minutes, last 5 minutes.
Okay.
Captain.
I'll try to rush up. Now, these are the challenges that are being posed by the non-state actors. Piracy and armed robbery, we have spoken enough of it, and enough precautions have been taken, and it has just shifted. Initially, it was in the South China Sea, then it went to Horn of Africa, then it has gone to West Africa. This one will continue, I am afraid, as long as there is political instability in the coastal state. Ships, unfortunately, are being used for terrorist acts. Illicit traffic of arms and narcotics has become a very unfortunate feature of ships trading from South Africa, South America to the other waters. Human trafficking, we saw ships being utilized for human trafficking in the Mediterranean. However, these issues have not affected Indian shipping much, but these are very prevalent. The last is the cyber security. This has become a big menace now. And with the ships, with the world body considering autonomous vessels, this is going to be a major issue in future. This is just data that has come from piracy and armed robbery taken from the IMB. Though it is coming down in the West Africa, but it has increased substantially. Though it has come down in East Africa, it has increased substantially on the West Africa. Thanks to the efforts of Navy and Coast Guard, this region has become free, and I had the fortune of representing at IMO to bring down to give our case and in turn reduce the high HRA at the BIMCO and for our Indian ships. These are few photographs of piracy as it is happening now. Now, I'm just putting up the maritime profile of India so that we can compare with the maritime profile of other countries. This is the unfortunate part, and this is again, this data is taken from UNCTAD, though it may be different than the data that is given by the DG Shipping. This is one important element. When we have 3.49% of the world's GDP, we have a fleet size of barely 1%. When we compare that, these are the percentage and the number of ships, and you can see the sad aspect as far as Indian shipping is concerned. The data are slightly different because different reports are giving different figures. So I've just collated from the UN publications. Even the registration in open registries have increased, and the beauty is that Vietnam has taken the crew and have already started registering foreign ownership, whereas in India we are yet to start. This is the share of different type of vessels and its impact on the trade. As you can see, the container ships percentile is increasing, and as said by Mr. Devli, the previous speaker, we have hardly any presence in this sector. It's a matter of concern. Number of container ships and gas carriers are growing. And again, I dare say, India is yet to get up from its slumber to meet the challenges of the trade. China has maximum number and has the largest capacity of container ships as well as building containers. These are the control on container ships. Maersk has 18%, and I'm afraid India has hardly any presence. Gentlemen, I'm rushing through because I have to stick to the timetable, and I've been already told that I have hardly any time.
Actually, you can wind up in 1 minute. We already overshot the time. Another minute or so.
Oh, I see. Okay. So I'm just presenting, these are the corrective measures. We have no other choice. We have to build up our maritime constituency and own tonnage. And I fully agree with the issues raised by Mr. Devli, the CEO of INSA. Our legislation, and we have to get over this, commonly known as the sea blindness. Promote modal shift, being a part of the ministry's group. we had already submitted a report to the government that it's high time we have a modal shift. In a country where we have 66% of the cargo is moving by road and almost 30% moving by rail, and barely 4 to 5% is moving by ship, despite boasting all the time that we have 7,000 plus kilometers of coast. These are the other issues. This is another one, have national and international presence. May I say that we have hardly any presence in International Maritime Organization or International Labour Organization or even PIMCO. Then how can we expect our maritime constituency or our maritime matters to be heard world over? These are the few initiatives we have taken. One thing good is that we have complied with ISPS code on our ships and ports during my period at Director General of Shipping. We complied with the requirement of the ISPS codes by and large, meeting the norms, started with container security initiatives, and all our ships are in compliance with the requirement. And this is one aspect which takes care of ships operating in our sensitive areas. This is a general figure of the movement of ships detected through the AIS. This is the traffic movement in or around Indian coast. Why I'm showing these figures is because that the traffic density in or around Indian coast is so high that almost 1/3 of the oil passes through the narrow passage here. And you can imagine if there is a casualty, what impact it will have in or around the coast. Yet we are yet to regulate the traffic here, either by the traffic separation scheme or create an eco-sensitive area in or around the Laccadive Island or even the Andaman Island here.
Captain Panda, may I request you to conclude now, because we have already fairly overshot the time.
Okay. This is IRNSS, which was very recently accepted by IMO. And these are our concerns, which Mr. Devuli has also highlighted. And I hope these issues are being addressed sooner than later. And I will answer the comments or the questions in the answer session due to the paucity of time. I'm closing the issue, and thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Captain Panda. I think you extensively covered what are our security concerns and what we need to go about. We have taken up a little extra time, but I think we'll try and trim it at the question answer session. May I request Aishwarya and team to pose the questions that have come, and please combine it so that the speakers can answer it at one lot.
Thank you, sir. So some of the questions have already been answered in the chat by Mr. Anil Devli. So I'll just go ahead and point out the questions that haven't been answered. The first question is posed by Commodore Venugopal to Admiral B. Kannan. The question is, sir, do you think merging of resources and technical expertise of PSU shipyards under one entity improves the productivity? And the next question is again posed to Admiral Kannan, Vice Admiral Kannan by Amrita Saha. The question reads, to promote agile and efficient defense shipbuilding, L&T has been submitting numerous papers on the topic of PPP model. However, there is a lot of resistance faced from DPSUs like GRSE, GSL, particularly on the cooperation of exports, and we end up losing the program to shipyards like HHI, South Korea, PTPAL, Indonesia, and now even Turkish shipyards in Southeast Asia. What should be GOI's initiative to get over this mistrust and promote genuine collaboration even under LOC? Another question from Commodore Vasan to Admiral Kannan. The question reads, how can we bring in greater private participation? The policies, though available for adopting such course, nothing much has happened. What will make it change?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll request Admiral Kannan to answer this, then we'll take on the rest.
Okay. Thank you, Aishwarya. I'll answer the last question first. That is of Commodore Vasan. How do you get higher participation from private sector? As I had mentioned earlier, private sector shipyards, as far as their capacity for commercial shipbuilding is concerned, is limited. And there isn't any program in the country run by Ministry of Shipping for making sure that there is preference being given for Indian shipyards to get the global order, except for the subsidy. I've already told you in the presentation, you have to address the issues of what are the disadvantages like high import content and better design capability in the country so that our shipyards become competitive. That's number one. Number two, as far as defense shipbuilding is concerned, I think level playing field has been fairly well established as of 2020. On paper, the government has committed that they will not nominate any more orders for any shipyard unless it is something to do with the infrastructure. For example, if you want to build another aircraft carrier, you can only go to Cochin Shipyard because they only have the dry dock for it. So I think as far as defense shipbuilding is concerned, there's a level playing field, and whoever can quote the best price will win, be it public or private. As far as commercial shipbuilding is concerned, I have highlighted already that some systemic issues are there, which the country has to get over the next 10 years. I'm giving a time of 10 years so that they catch up with the other foreign shipyards. As for the question from Renu is concerned, Renu, what was the question?
Aishwarya, can you repeat?
Just repeat, Commodore?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. One moment, sir. Yes, sir. So the question reads, sir, do you think merging of resources?
Okay, I got that. Got the point.
Yes,
right.
Yes.
See, as such, out of 5 PSUs, 4 are under MOD. So they are already under one umbrella. And there is a fair amount of coordination which has been taking place. But I don't think with the level playing field policy which has come in 2020, that need to bother us. Because each shipyard, by virtue of its infrastructure, is carved out for a certain type of ships. And there is, of course, some commonality between GSL and GRSE as far as the size of ships are concerned, and between HSL and CSL for some, again, larger ships. So I don't think bringing them under one roof will help. On the contrary, if you leave them independently, they will struggle and perform better. Otherwise, there's always a feeling of complacency that they will be looked after by the parent. So I don't think that is required from my side. The third question was from Amrita. Should I just give me a trigger on that?
Yes, sir. Just a minute. Amrita Saha, yes. To promote agile and efficient defense shipbuilding, L&T has been submitting numerous papers on the topic of PPP model. However, there is a lot of resistance faced from DPSUs like...
Right.
Yes.
I think the PPP model, which has fructified in DPP 2020, it has taken us 3-4 years of persuasion at MOD to bring in these clauses by which every shipyard is competing from a level playing field. And as I told you, it's a very welcome move both on the financial side as well as on the technical side. They brought in a lot of factors. And this will give some good results 5 years from now. For next 5 years, it will be still loaded in favor of PSUs because PSUs are flush with earlier orders which are nominated, and nominated orders are always overpriced. The Navy pays much more than what they should, and therefore the public sector shipyards have got a lot of money in their hands because the orders are already placed. 5 years from now, those orders will be complete, and all future orders, I presume, if they go by level playing field, then each shipyard will work better. They have to be more efficient, necessarily more efficient to survive. Otherwise, what has happened to the private sector shipyards will happen to public sector shipyards 5 years from now, which the government, of course, will not permit to happen. But definitely good for the customer, good for Navy, good for Coast Guard, and good for any other owner who wants to get it built. You will get your ships built much cheaper than what you're getting it today. And of course, you'll get it on time as well.
Okay, Aishwarya, go to the next set.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This question comes from Myanmar, and I'm unsure who it's directed to. Yes, so the question is, how will India's decision not to join RCEP impact on security challenges in Indian Ocean with Myanmar-China economic corridor to be flourished in years to come? The next question is posed by Amrita Saha. The question is directed at Captain Panda. The question reads, how can the labor union issues be resolved to get over age-old insecurities like the Tamil Nadu-Sri Lanka history? The security problems do not exist anymore, but certain miscreants tend to create disputes which are being a hindrance to further escalation in shipbuilding growth. What is your advice on this aspect? Another question to Captain Panda is posed by Kiran Kankoje, and the question reads, perspective, planning and execution of its maritime vision within the last 3 decades has enabled China to attain maritime growth and dominance that has now that it has now. This cannot be A, admired, B, analyzed, and C, emulated. Is the GOI, the current dispensation, doing the analysis for an expeditious catch-up, and with what time frame in mind?
Okay, the RCEP question I will tackle. Captain Panda, I request you to tackle the other 2 questions.
Yeah. Okay. So far as the issue concerning the seafarers working on India and Sri Lanka are concerned, the labor issues. As you may be knowing, the labor issues are attended or are addressed in the Maritime Labor Convention for ships operating anywhere. Since India and Sri Lanka are both signatories to the Maritime Labor Convention, I am of the opinion that the labor issues on their flagships may be addressed to in India in DG Shipping or to the Maritime Administration in Sri Lanka. So far as people working ashore, they are guided by the local rules, and there are no maritime convention or maritime convention interfere in that matter. So that addresses the first question. The second question, I fully agree that every country has to have its maritime vision, but must take good things of other countries, how they have come up. In this context, the Ministry of Shipping has already prepared a maritime vision for 10 years, Maritime Vision 2030. I understand that has been prepared, taking various inputs and many issues which I addressed and Mr. Devli addressed. I think I'm not very sure whether they have already put up for comments from the citizen. or from the interested entities, but I understand that it is open for views. You may look into the Ministry of Shipping's website on Maritime Vision 2030 and give your feedback. Thank you.
Okay, Aishwarya, I think if there I must thank Mr. Anil Devli for answering the questions online. And if there are any further questions, I think that would be answered online since we have slightly overshot the time. It remains for me to thank Admiral Kannan, Mr. Anil Devli and Captain Panda for the very extensively covering their subject. And I would, I think, flag 2-3 key issues which I think needs to be considered. All of them have brought out the need for very clear-cut policy decisions, policy changes that are required to revive our shipping and shipbuilding industry. Without that, we would not be able to catch up or really be a maritime power that we aspire to be, to build up our industry. We have all the potential. Of course, if you leave it to individuals, they will try and get, if it is, ₹1 cheaper, they will try and go it there. But I think we have to have a policy decision to do this. And as far as the RCEP question is concerned on the security issues, I don't think really India joining RCEP or not is an issue, because if it is increasing of shipping as a bilateral agreement between, say, Myanmar and China, that would again increase the number of ships going there, the shipping cargo that goes. So India has to look at the overall security scenario, how it's going to affect our IOR region, how it will affect all the detailed aspects of the shipping threats that emerge. So that we'll have to look at an overall picture. And I don't think it matters really whether we join RCEP or not. I think one other issue which not really covered in, it didn't catch my ears from any of the speakers, was one thing as a nation, India, with our long coastline, we got to really look at developing our coastal shipping. That has always been slightly lagging behind. We have so many ports, minor, major, almost close to 200 plus ports. So coastal shipping will also bring down the load on our highways. And similarly, for example, a state like Kerala, where I'm situated, if you develop the inland waterways, you can do a lot of shipping there. There are other ways also to do it. So I think this is one aspect that also our policy planners have to look in. And one other issue, just touched in passing, was the kind of manpower. Now, many years ago, I remember in the early 90s, when nation was facing a major crunch in foreign exchange, from the naval headquarters, we had forwarded a policy paper to the government saying that how Philippines is able to manage a lot of foreign exchange, because there are a lot of labor that they provide to merchant shipping at very low-end jobs, but they all bring in. And the Philippine government was showing small incentives, like giving them a lot of customs duty clearance, etc., what they bring in. If a normal person was getting an X exemption, a little more was given. But they were all remitting foreign exchanges. And I remember the study we did that even if we are able to get in a reasonable amount of manpower into the merchant shipping for manning it, and I'm not talking purely at the captain or officer level, even at the low end of the sailor level, that's another major foreign exchange earner for the country then. I'm sure that's equally relevant. I would like to sum up once again by quoting on this very relevant issue of shipping and shipbuilding by none other than K.M. Panikkar. He said that a nation's peacetime commerce and mercantile marine are inextricably connected with her maritime strength. Though he said naval, I'm saying maritime. They provide reserve of trained manpower and of shipping required for military purposes. Reserve of skills required for expansion of a navy in wartime depends more on peacetime activity at sea, on its mercantile marine and its building yards, on the familiarity with the sea lanes and ports which trading ships normally acquire. In order to be a maritime power, a nation has to possess extensive skill in shipbuilding and must have a lot of people devoted to overseas trade. And he actually concludes by saying that we must create a maritime tradition in the public and sustain interest in oceanic problems, and a conviction that India's future lies in the maritime arena. Thank you very much. Thank you once again, the panelists. Now I hand you over back to Mr. Shashi Nair or the Commodore Watson for the next session.